This episode of Brains on Games will look at The Wolves, which is an area control game with a clever action selection mechanism. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to look at The Wolves by Pandasaurus Games. The folks over at Pandasaurus sent this to me not too long ago. Here is the box cover. You've got the big wolf eye here on the front. The Wolves is a game for between 2 and 5 players. The box says ages 14 and up is where it's appropriate, but I think even 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds could get the hang of this one. And games play in about an hour and 15 minutes. Let's take a deeper look at The Wolves by Pandasaurus Games. The Wolves is a game that's medium in terms of its complexity. It's not light, but it's not super heavy either. And what you're doing in this game is trying to earn the most victory points by expanding your wolf pack and by controlling areas on the board. And we'll talk about how that scoring works in a moment. You'll start the game with a couple of these alpha wolves and a couple of pack wolves, and then there's a drafting phase to determine positions of your wolves on the board. The board is modular. I've only set up a single piece of the board here because you really need to see the player board and this moonlight board. If we actually set up all the different parts of the modular board, it would take up the entire table. But you'll get the idea just from having a single region. The number of regions on the board depends on the number of players, so they're kind of configured differently every time. And you set that up according to the player count based on some pictures in the rule book. That's one thing I should mention. This is the first game I think I've ever opened that didn't have a physical rule book in it. You get these cheat sheets, but I had to download the rule book and read it on a tablet. So they took a little bit of a different tack in setting up the box for this game. So each player is going to play a different wolf. The wolves of different colors will have a different player board, although other than the color, the boards themselves are identical with one exception. You're going to have these tiles here at the top of the board, and each wolf has a special tile that's the same on both sides, representing their kind of home or preferred territory. So the forest wolf, of course, has a forest, and it's a forest on both sides. All of the other tiles that you start with have a different terrain type on the opposite side. And you can tell what terrain type is on the other side by these little corner icons. So the action selection in this game is very clever. And then you begin, the first player will start choosing actions. And the action selection in this game is super unique, I think. Now, there's a few games that have action selections that I really like. Concordia is one where you have cards in your hand that you discard in order to take an action, and then you have a card that will allow you to collect them, but you get bigger bonuses depending on how many cards you've already played. So Concordia has a great action selection mechanism. Praga Caput Regni has a rondel that has different bonuses depending on the position of the action on the board. So that one is fun too, but this is super clever and straightforward, easy to understand. What you'll do in this game to take an action is you'll flip one of the terrain tiles based on the location that you want that action to occur in. So for example, if I wanted to move one of my wolves, or in this case, I can move, see, we've got pack spread here of 2, so that means I can move 2 wolves for 1 move action, and they can move up to 3 hexes. So if I wanted to move a wolf to, say, a grass tile, I would flip over my grass tile, and then you can see now it's changed, and I've got 2 rock tiles. So say I move my 2 wolves over here. There we go. Now I've done my first action. You get 2 actions on your turn, and then your second action is going to involve flipping additional tiles. So movement only causes you to flip 1. If I wanted to build a den and put one of these den pieces from my board onto that region, I would need to flip 2 matching tiles. So in this case, the only tiles I have now that match are the forest and these rocks. So I might, for my second action, add a wolf den over here on the forest tile because I do have 2 of those. And each round I am going to have at least 1 forest tile because that's the one that's the same on both sides. But now I have only 1. I've got 2 desert tiles, I've got 2 rocks and 1 tundra left here. Now, one other special thing is going to happen based on the location of my wolves. There are a couple of extra tokens here in each region. One of them is a scoring token. We'll talk about how scoring takes place, but that goes on the water hole here in the middle of the region. You've got some prey tokens and you've got some lone wolves here that you might be able to recruit into your pack. Now, for these prey tokens, if I've got 3 of my wolves surrounding a prey token, I get to take that off and put it onto my player board. Now, the iconography is great on this game too. It's very clear the bonuses you're getting and what you're supposed to do. Maybe you don't need that paper rule book, but certainly I think it would have been helpful for me, at least for the first game. But now I've covered up one of these spots, and you can see there's a little wolf mouth here. I get this token. This allows me I can discard it to take an extra action. So that's a bonus action token. What's happened in addition here is that I've taken one of my dens off of the board, and now I can move 3 wolves instead of 2. So the board has these spaces on it, and as you remove the dens, or these are layers over here, and you might expand your pack of wolves, your pack is going to get stronger and have greater abilities. You've got the spread, how many wolves you can move. You've got the speed, how many hexes you can move. You've got your howl range. We'll talk about the howl action. And then there are victory points underneath these layers. By flipping 2 of those tiles over, I was able to place that den, and that's increasing my spread so that I can move an extra wolf. But there are some other things that you can do by flipping 2 tiles. I have a wolf down here, a lone wolf who's on a forest tile. I could have flipped those 2 tiles to howl. Now, howling, you have to have an alpha wolf, and he has to be within howl range of the wolf that you're howling at. So if I were to howl and flip those 2 tokens over, maybe I would instead take this wolf off the board and place one of mine on the board. What happens to tiles you remove from the board? This is where the scoring starts to come in. Anything you take off the board, more or less, we'll talk about it, but anything you take off the board is going to wind up right here on the moonlight board. There are a few spaces that have moons on them. This is the 2-player and 3-player side of the board, and if you flip it over, there's 4 and 5. So when we played, we had 3 players, so we were focused on the 3-player moons here, and so once 9 spaces are filled up on the board, you score these little crescent moon sections. Now, I didn't take the crescent moon for this region. I took a half moon instead. So once we get up to 17, we're going to score that region. Once you've covered up this space, you're going to look to see how many of each player's wolves are in that particular region of the board. And there's the little blue outline around the outside to help you distinguish once you've got all of the pieces on there. So in this case, of course, it's only me on the board. So I would get to take this token. That's going to give me 6 victory points. If there's another player who has wolves on there, they might get second place and get 3 victory points that they can put on their board. That's going to count up at the end of the game. So things that you take off the board are going to come over onto the moonlight board and begin to fill that up. Things you take off the player board are going to give you victory points, or they'll give you some upgrade to what you can do with your pack. When I take a layer off my board, that's going to give me some victory points at the end. It's also going to give me one of these little chips, which is like a wild terrain token that I can use. I can discard this, and it can count as any one of these different terrains. So now I could potentially flip over 3 matching desert tiles. Why would you want to flip over 3? Well, that's the final action that you can take, which is to dominate. So if you've got 3 matching tiles, which is not easy to get, you may have to actually take some actions that give you those wild terrains before you're able to do that. But if you can flip over 3 matching tiles, you can replace an opponent's wolf with one of your own, a pack wolf, not an alpha. So the alpha can howl if you've turned over 3 of those that match the terrain that the other wolf is on, and then you can replace a pack wolf with one of your color. That pack wolf would come off the board and go onto the moonlight board, just like we said earlier. You could also howl to replace a den. So you can't do that for a lair, that great big one that I put out on the board, but you could replace one of these dens, and then again, the den would go onto the moonlight board and slowly start to fill that up. So there is a bit of take that. So you're moving about the board, you're strengthening your pack, you're maybe recruiting other wolves to join in, you're trying to capture that prey, you're building these dens and taking control of particular regions. So there's quite a bit going on in this game. I do find the player boards, like the Scythe player boards, for example, take something that's kind of complicated and strategic and simplify it down, which is really good, especially for the younger players or players who aren't as familiar with board games. And maybe especially important since there's no paper rulebook that comes in that box. But what skills are you working on when you're playing the wolves? Well, it is very much a spatial game. You're looking to see how far and how many wolves that you can move on your turn. Do you have a tile that you can flip over to allow that to happen? So you're trying to take over those regions and make sure you have enough wolves to control it. So there is a spatial component here, but it's especially a game that exercises the executive functioning skills. Like all strategy games, you're planning ahead, you're tackling things in an organized, efficient way, you're budgeting your actions. You only get 2 actions per turn unless you've got a bonus chip that you can turn in. So there's a lot of executive functioning skills that are involved. But what I kind of like about this is that you might find younger players who are sort of learning to plan ahead and playing these kinds of board games. Maybe they're only planning ahead to their second move. Okay, if I move this wolf over here, then I'll have 2 matching tiles and then I can do this thing on my next turn. Maybe they're planning ahead to their following turn so that they can build a lair. Oh, I'm going to move a wolf over here. Now I've got 2 matching ones. I can build a den. Next turn, I'll be able to upgrade that to a lair if I flip over the action tiles in just the right way. You might be planning ahead to the next scoring phase. Oh, we're getting close to the middle one here, the half moon. I want to make sure I have enough wolves. So there are sort of levels of complexity in terms of how far you're planning ahead, and everything is made so clear by these boards. Just the fact of having the right tiles in place kind of gives you some element of short-term planning that we really liked when we played the game. Final thoughts about the wolves. Well, we had a lot of fun playing this game. We played it at a 3-player count. My son had his friend over and we were all learning the game together. And even though it's a game that takes over an hour to play and maybe a bit longer when it's your first time playing, we immediately reset the board and played again. So this one was a hit at our house. It's got the area control. It's got the movement of those pieces. It's got those wooden wolf meeples that are great. So it's strategic and you can focus on winning the regions for those scoring phases. But the player who won the games that we played actually didn't focus so much on that. They were much more focused on upgrading their pack. So there are multiple pathways that you can try and take in order to win this game. If you're upgrading your pack, you're going to get some victory points. It seemed to be the player who early on was able to capture the most prey, had lots of extra actions they could take later in the game, and that was really helpful for them. So there are different strategies that you can try out, and I've played this game a few times, but there's other things that I want to try. And I played the Forest Wolf in the first few games that we played. We didn't switch that part around. It just made it easier for us to do. So I want to try the other wolves as well and see how that affects things. So there are different ways to earn victory points, which I really like. This action selection mechanism of flipping those tiles over is so clever. That is something that really stood out to all of us. We would sit and look at our board and we'd be thinking, okay, if I do this first, then I'll have that tile. Then I'll be able to do this other thing. If I upgrade this, then I'll get the wild token that I can turn in. That's going to allow me to do this action that I really want to be able to do. So it is, I found this to be really unique, a really fun way to choose what you're going to do. And it's a real granular kind of strategic planning that you're doing when you're just flipping these back and forth. The design of those tiles is great too, because you know what's underneath. If I flip this rocky one over, I'm going to get a grass tile. So you're not constantly picking them up and looking at the other side to see what it is you're going to get after you flip them over. So it allows you to be strategic. And the fact that each wolf has a different tile that they're guaranteed to have on their board is one where maybe if you're competing for control with grass wolf, you want to be careful of leaving your wolves alone on those grass tiles, because they're going to have that one extra grass tile. They're always going to have that on their board. So, it does create some interesting opportunities for strategy. And like I was saying, when it came to the skills, it's, gradually ramping up from very short-term planning to longer-term strategic planning. We really, really enjoyed this game. Now, are there downsides? The main downside for me, and you could probably tell from my description earlier in the video, is that I do like to have a paper rule book. I'll be honest with you. I'm the one who teaches these games. Having it on the tablet is a good bonus, but the decision to not include the paper rulebook in the box was probably good from a resource standpoint, but it wasn't as good for a teaching the game standpoint. Now, that might be unique to our situation because we have games coming in at Brains on Games. Every week there's something new that comes in. So the next time I have time or get a chance to play the Wolves and teach somebody new how to play it, it might be 2 months before I get to pull this off the table again. And by that time, I'll have forgotten those rules and I'll need to read them over. And the cheat sheet is good and detailed, but it might not be enough if I haven't taken this game out of the box in a few weeks. So, maybe that's unique to me. Your mileage may vary. I do like to have a paper rule book that I can physically flip the pages. Like I said, I like to have a rule book on a tablet as a bonus, as an extra resource so that it's searchable. But most of the time, we like to have a rule book handy that we can flip through when we need it with all the key terms, et cetera, et cetera. The cheat sheets are good. But for us, like I said, I prefer to have something that's physical. But that being said, that's a pretty nitpicky knock on this game. It was a fun strategy game that got my son and his friend together with me to play for probably 3 hours altogether. We played this one. So, that is the best review of all, I would say. So thanks so much to Pandasaurus Games for sending the Wolves my way. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.